Welcome to the Springfield Amazon Web Services User Group, our May 2021 meeting. We'll talk about how you could complete all 12 AWS certifications in only 6 weeks. Today we're going to hear from Adam Elmore, who has done just that. But before we talk about Adam, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Springfield AWS. We're based in Springfield, Missouri. I've got a map on this slide that shows where we're at, but for those of you who are watching remotely today, we're in the Midwest United States. And welcome to everyone who's tuning in live today and to everyone who's watching after the fact. If you'd like to follow Springfield AWS, you can join our Meetup page, you could subscribe to our YouTube page, or you could join our discussion on Discord. The sgf.dev page should have a direct link, but you can find us at discord.sgf.dev. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Adam Elmore. Adam is a freelance web and cloud engineer. He has 7 years of AWS experience. He's contributed to the AWS CDK. He's completed all 12 AWS certifications in only 6 weeks, which I'm sure is why most of you are here today. I'm looking forward to hearing his story and how he came about doing that and any tips that he might be able to offer to the rest of us who aspire to get certified. Adam grew up here in the Ozarks and lives in Springfield. And I'll hand it over to Adam and let him tell you a little bit more about himself. Let's switch the screen share just a second, Adam.
No worries. Yeah, Gary, I will make the slides available. I've got a separate deck here I'm going to share.
All right, Adam, you should be able to share now.
All right.
So I will stop the share.
Can you see that?
All right, there you go. Perfect. Good deal.
All right. Thank you, Jason, for the introduction. I am Adam Elmore, and I do have a slide in here that's going to basically say all the same things. I am a freelance web and cloud engineer. I enjoy kind of building things on AWS. I've been doing that for about 7 years. I started on AWS when I started a startup called StatNews back in 2014. And I do live here in Springfield, Missouri. And I grew up here in the Ozarks in Willow Springs, Missouri. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on GitHub. Those are mostly the places you can find me. And my keyboard is not working for changing the slides. So I'm going to be clicking on these little arrows. That's going to be a challenge. So I did achieve the 12 AWS certifications over a period of 6 weeks. It wasn't continuous 6 weeks. So I actually started, I've got all the dates here. I started with the associate level certifications. I did those a week in July last year. And then kind of in January decided that was fun. Maybe I'll try and do them all. And I started with all the specialties and then wrapped it up over about 5 weeks, starting in late January. Yeah, and I finished on Cloud Practitioner. I'll get into kind of some of those details. I did write about that experience on Medium. You can find that at adamelmore.medium.com. And the agenda for tonight. So first, I think is just why. So I know this crowd is probably aware of the AWS certification process, but I'm just assuming this could be a group of people that are really just into AWS, and maybe you don't necessarily know why you might kind of get into certification, what the benefits are. So we'll explore that a little bit. And then in the second section, kind of the meat of this, I'll just go through each of the exams and just kind of share my experience with each of them, kind of how I prepared, some of the study materials that I recommend for those, and just kind of go through each one. And then we'll end then on Q&A, just any questions you might have. I told Jason if there is like a question in the middle, I don't mind to field it, but we will have that dedicated space at the end. So Jason can curate those. And I'm going to keep clicking my keyboard key, and it's going to keep not doing anything. Okay, there we go. So first, why? So what are the benefits of AWS certification. So I will say that little animation that you just saw on that chart, I tried every way in the world to remove that and I could not. So Canva, if you ever catch this video, I need to be able to turn off the animations on the stupid pie charts. That drives me crazy. Yeah, I should have gotten to the content, not just commented on the animation. Well, we got to see it again. So the perks of AWS certs, I kind of broke it into 3 categories. So one, it's just a whole lot of learning. No matter your background in AWS, if you go down the route of taking one or more of these certifications, you're going to learn a whole lot, stuff that you maybe just wouldn't otherwise need to learn. I had been building on AWS for 7 years before I took my first certification exam. And really the things I use, building in a practical sense day to day, it's a limited subset of the 200 plus services that AWS offers. So, I do a lot of stuff with serverless type technologies. So sort of AppSync, API Gateway, Lambdas, DynamoDB, and S3, the kind of like usual suspects in that space, but I don't spend a lot of time, working with services that are more sort of hybrid in nature, or more container, based stuff. I don't use those services much. So it was a great way to kind of force learning by taking all these tests and having to prepare for them. And then also community. I'll get into each of these in more depth, but you're going to meet a lot of people on the way. There's a lot of people really into AWS certifications, and I didn't realize that until I kind of got into it. And then the third bucket is AWS IQ, which is not like your IQ about AWS, but it's an actual service. I think it's a criminally under sort of known represented service. Not nearly enough people know about AWS IQ. So I'm going to talk about what that is. It's sort of a marketplace for AWS experts to sort of monetize their knowledge. So that first perk, learning, AWS, I don't need to tell you all that AWS is super complex. There's over, as I said, 200 services. The expertise around AWS is super coveted. I can tell you there's a lot of demand for people who understand AWS. And there's just so many organizations. AWS has millions of customers of all sizes. And really those people are running into problems every day that they need that AWS expertise. So having practical AWS knowledge in today's landscape really does feel like a superpower. Second, if you like building things, as I enjoy building things, then it's great to just understand kind of how you can best take advantage of AWS. I build a lot of things for myself, sort of side projects, and being able to do that and take the most advantage of the underlying services that AWS has to offer, it really allows you to kind of, I call it permission. I mean, I didn't coin the term, but permissionless. I mean, you don't have to sort of knock on Auth0's door and say, hey, I have more users. Can you sort of upgrade me or whatever? You just build all that on AWS and you have that native experience, and it's going to scale. It's going to do all those things, and you're going to have a lot better understanding of kind of how to build those kind of solutions out. And then lastly, it's going to apply to your work. So if you're working in tech, there's a good chance that AWS knowledge is going to be applicable in your job at your workplace, and that's just good for everybody. So the second perk, community. As I started getting into AWS certifications, I started kind of making it publicly known, joining subreddits, that communicating around the certification journey just opens you up to so many new connections and friendships, people that are on that exact same path. So there is a very rich community, and specifically after you get your first certification, you'll be invited into this private LinkedIn group. There's over 100,000 members. I'm sure there's people on this call today that have AWS certs and are in that LinkedIn private group. But you just see every day, you get to watch people completing their certifications, sort of meeting their goals. And it's just a great place to kind of network with other like-minded folks. And then obviously, as you learn more and more about AWS and you put these certifications kind of next to your name, that's going to give you opportunities that you otherwise might not have had. So whether that's advancement within your current job or sort of learning about other opportunities outside of your current job, it's just a great way to grow your career. And then the last bucket is AWS IQ. And I could spend like an hour and a half just sort of talking about AWS IQ and railing on what I think is just way too utilized a service. Most people don't even know it exists, and I didn't know it existed when I started on my certification path. So I had decided I was going to get all of the certifications before I even had heard of AWS IQ. I only saw it sort of on the certification benefits page. So it's this platform where you can basically apply once you hold any AWS certification. You can apply to be an expert on this platform, and basically they funnel AWS customers who have problems into AWS IQ, and it allows people who do have this expertise to sort of, come to terms and agree to take on some scope of work for AWS customers and solve their problems for them. So it's a third-party kind of marketplace. It's really fantastic. There are so many just amazing customers that I can't imagine finding outside of AWS IQ, and not nearly this quickly. So just in the time I've been on there, I've just been blown away with how many quality customers, and as a consultant, as a freelance engineer, how many great long-term relationships that you can forge on there. So I've just kind of totally skipped over my bullet points here. Payments and permissions are built in. So when they pay you through the platform, it's just going on their AWS bill, which is a huge convenience. Customers love that. And then you can also sort of request specific IAM role permissions into their account. They can grant that access. So all of the sort of ergonomics around the experience are built into the platform. It's extremely easy on both sides for the experts and the customers to kind of just work through, problems, meet goals, and to get paid as an AWS expert. And I'll say the last bullet point here, anybody that would wonder, like, is there really value in taking all of these exams? Can't you just take a few of them? They sort of plastered these certifications all over the AWS IQ service. And I've had several customers tell me that they just chose me because I had more certifications. Like they see my profile with 10 of them or 11 or 12 or whatever. And they see somebody with 2 and it's a sort of huge advantage. So yeah, a lot of people, when I share this, they say, why would you try and tell other people and like to come in and be your competitor on this platform? There's so much work to do on that platform and so little time for any one person. I hope somebody hears this. It is US only today, and they are working to expand that into other regions across the world. But yeah, I just hope somebody hears it, takes it seriously, and sort of goes to the trouble of taking these certs. And if you're comfortable talking to customers about their AWS problems, you can make a really great career just on AWS IQ alone. I'm going to take a quick sip because I'm getting pretty dry.
Adam, is a question from Elvis, is the AWS IQ program different from the AWS subject matter expert program?
Yes. So AWS IQ it's a distinct service. You have to apply to be an expert. Once you are an expert, you're sort of able to see these work requests that come in. The SME, I can't remember if I've had any exposure to that, but it is a distinct service. It's a service most people just haven't heard of, and I think that's unfortunate. Did that answer your question, Elvis? I don't know if I'm waiting to hear something or.
Yes, he said it did. Thank you.
Yeah, it did. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh, you're good. No, you're good. All right, so I'm going to just go into the exams here and just kind of talk through all 12. I don't know that at the end of this, there's going to be an exact blueprint for you to go out and sort of achieve 12 certifications in some time frame, but I can share what I learned throughout the process of sort of aggressively taking these. You have to take into context that I had a lot of years building on AWS, so I had that experience. If you're just kind of getting started with AWS, I would, elongate those time lanes and not sort of try to be too aggressive. So the first exam that most people are going to take is the Cloud Practitioner. And Cloud Practitioner is sort of, it's the cheapest exam. It's going to be the easiest, and it's really kind of more like getting a feel for what AWS services, like this name kind of means this. You're not going into a lot of depth with the details of how these services work. You're not having to memorize sort of like limits within each service. It's really like single sentence questions that are things like, if you need to understand more about your bill, which service would you go into in AWS? And all the questions across all the exams are multiple choice. But as the exams get harder, they do run into sort of pick 3 out of 5. They're all good options, but pick the best 3, that kind of thing. Cloud Practitioner doesn't really do that. It's very straightforward. And it's a great way to kind of, if you're especially new to AWS, kind of get your feet wet, and to once you've passed this Cloud Practitioner mark, feel like you understand the basic concepts. And you may not have sort of in-depth knowledge of any one service, but you kind of know, like from a security standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, how to kind of operate within the AWS landscape. I think in terms of study materials, the only thing you really would need, and I am recommending a whole lot of paid study materials, and obviously these exams have a cost as well. So this isn't a sort of free guidance that you're going to go out and achieve all these without any cost. There are more affordable ways to do it, and I'll get into that. But a Cloud Guru is kind of great for these early courses, and you can sort of sign up for a free trial and see. But I think the A Cloud Guru Cloud Practitioner course is going to be all you would need to pass this exam. And then the Solutions Architect Associate is sort of, if people don't take Cloud Practitioner, this is generally the first test that people will take, and it's the first that I took. It does cover quite a few services within the AWS landscape, so you know, it's going to be much more involved in the Cloud Practitioner. You're going to have to do a lot more prep. I have down there the A Cloud Guru again. Their associate level courses are fantastic. So all 3 of the associate level exams, Solutions Architect, Developer, and SysOps, all of those, you can kind of stay on A Cloud Guru and just work through those courses, and you're gonna pass if you can handle sort of their checkpoints and everything sort of makes sense throughout those courses, and you should be fine. I did put on here, and I recommend these for almost all of the exams. Tutorials Dojo, they have great practice tests. And the practice tests serve as sort of a good study guide as well. So once you finish a practice test, it's a full length test, 65 questions. You're going to have the opportunity to go through and see every question you missed. And he's got in-depth sort of links into the documentation, AWS docs, to kind of see where your understanding's off. So they're a great way to check where you're at, and then also kind of prepare leading up to the test and fill in those knowledge gaps. So in terms of the services on Solutions Architect Associate, VPC, just networking in general on AWS is going to be an early theme. So all of the associate levels, if you can sort of diagram out a VPC and sort of know what pieces of the puzzle you need to put in place to stand up a basic VPC, then that's going to get you pretty far across all 3 associate level exams. So knowing how to configure sort of private and public subnets, gateways, so whether that's internet gateways, virtual private gateways, setting up basic routing tables. I don't even know if routing tables really come in this early, but being able to at least understand security groups and how you would use security groups and network access control lists to sort of manage incoming and outgoing security within your VPC. If you just learn that stuff, it's going to pay dividends. So those concepts are all throughout the associate level, and then they just keep getting more advanced as you get into the harder exams. So I'm going to have that as a service here that you need to focus on for all 3 of the associate level. S3 and EC2, basic services on AWS. S3, it's going to be things like understanding bucket policies and understanding lifecycle policies, how you can control, you know, moving across the different tiers and cost sort of cost buckets or lifecycle, you know, moving from infrequent access to intelligent tiering to Glacier, that sort of stuff. It's pretty high level. Everything here on the associate level is going to be pretty high level. So you're not diving super deep, but you are touching a lot of services. So elastic load balancing, understanding auto scaling groups and kind of the basic concepts there, and the high level kind of levers that you need to be able to pull to stand up basic infrastructure. RDS, Yeah, it's, again, not a lot of depth, but just understanding kind of the different flavors of RDS. You're not needing to memorize like the different versions of MySQL and Postgres that are supported, but you do need to kind of understand the basic, when you stand up RDS, an RDS instance, how do you manage fault tolerance? How do you, high availability, and how do you sort of manage backups? It's that kind of stuff at the associate level. Lambda, they don't touch a lot on, just in general, my feedback on all the certifications is that serverless is pretty underrepresented. But you will get scenarios at the associate level where you're trying to sort of take CloudWatch events and use a Lambda to respond to that and accomplish something. Kinesis, same thing. You go into a lot more depth with Kinesis later on. So once you get into like the data analytics specialty and those types of courses or exams, but you will have to you'll need to have some sort of cursory understanding of what Kinesis is and the different Kinesis services within the Kinesis family. SNS and SQS, yeah, I don't know that there's anything specific I would call out there. API Gateway and Route 53, CloudFront. IAM is just going to be something that kind of throughout all the certifications you need to have a basic grasp of, and it's really not that much information. Even when you get into the security specialization, which I'll talk about, there's some basic concepts within IAM that if you can understand those, then that's going to cover you on that front in terms of security on AWS. And then CloudWatch. So I put more than anything for this test, just understand there are a lot of services covered. It's not going into a lot of depth. And for that reason, it is a good entry course or entry exam to take. A lot of people will take Cloud Practitioner and then go straight into Solutions Architect Associate. And that's what I would recommend. So I had the difficulty on this one as a 3. And then the same study materials. The one thing I'll say, so these costs, all of the associate level and all the specialty, all the associate level courses are going to be $150. Once you take your Cloud Practitioner, if you take that first, it's $100. And then you get every test that you pass, you get a half off voucher. So from that point forward, after you take Cloud Practitioner, you can take half off of all these costs. Assuming you keep passing tests, you can keep taking off that half, and that'll save you a ton of money over the long haul. So then I think I skipped over developer. Yeah, developer associate. I took developer associate the day after I took solutions architect associate, and that was because I heard there was about 40 to 50% overlap, and I can attest that's true. I gotta take another drink. There's a lot of overlap. Sort of VPCs. I gotta remember to look at you guys too. I'm sorry. People are in the room, and I'm not just talking to myself. So if you understand VPCs, you're going to have like sort of 30% of all 3 of these tests covered, because it is sort of a recurring theme across all 3 associate level courses. The developer associate goes more into, oddly, DynamoDB. I had that as a second. It's pretty prominent for reasons I don't necessarily understand. Although I would say AWS generally, Amazon is trying to push people building stuff. If you're a developer on AWS, they're trying to push DynamoDB, and for good reasons. So there is some like specific stuff within DynamoDB you're going to need to study, and that'll come up in these study materials here below. But you're going to get into some things that you don't really talk about at all on the Solutions Architect Associate, and that's things like Elastic Beanstalk, getting into CloudFormation at a high level, so not super deep. But you are going to have some of that on the Developer Associate. More questions around the SDK and the CLI, because they're coming at it assuming as a developer you're going to be using those pretty often, and that's the case. And you're going to get some exposure to ECS and Fargate, other container services on AWS, step functions to a lesser degree. But then the whole code pipeline suite of tools, so code commit, code build, code deploy, and code pipeline, that suite, so sort of software development lifecycle stuff, is going to be a good portion of this test. I can't remember the percentage, it's on the sort of syllabus. But there's quite a few questions that are going to cover how you move code around as a developer on AWS. I don't think anyone uses code commit. I think it's kind of a joke, but in terms of code build, code deploy, code pipeline, those are services that developers are taking advantage of on the platform. And then X-Ray, like contrasting this to maybe the SysOps admin course, which we'll talk about next. You're going to talk more about X-ray on the developer side and more about CloudWatch on the SysOps admin. So study materials, same thing. I used A Cloud Guru for all 3 of the associate level courses. They're fantastic. Passed all of these pretty easily and just use their courses. Tutorials Dojo, again, if you feel like you want to kind of gauge where you're at, I would recommend those practice tests. They are paid. I think there's something like $10 to $15, and it comes with like 6 practice tests. They're really great, and I would recommend those. How are we doing on time? Am I going very slowly? Yes, 7:27. Okay, so SysOps admin is known as the hardest of the associate level exams. And that was the case for me, mostly because I'm a developer. So the developer was super easy for me, and I think it was aptly geared toward developers. This one, you're getting more into the sort of management of infrastructure, touching services I would never otherwise touch, like OpsWorks. I don't know if anyone's really touching OpsWorks anymore, but that's like Chef and Puppet stuff. But then more AWS native services like CloudFormation and Systems Manager. You're going to do a lot of stuff in Systems Manager. So there's a ton of services under Systems Manager. There's things like Parameter Store, which I think more people probably use, but then there's all kinds of other ancillary services for sort of taking EC2 instances and managing them at scale. So installing the SSM agent on all these things such that you can patch them together, you can sort of put them on those schedules. And there's just a lot of things within the SysOps admin course or exam that don't get covered in the first 2 associate level. So I would say it's the most distinct of the 3, and it was for me the most challenging. But again, if you have that VPC knowledge, that's going to carry you part of the way here. And then it's just getting more into the sort of monitoring and troubleshooting, high availability kind of stuff. So that's where the CloudWatch, and then the CLI and the SDK as well. Same study materials. I use nothing but the A Cloud Guru course. Same costs, same duration, all that stuff's the same. Okay, so Alexa Skill Builder. So I say 12 services. This whole talk is a lie. There are only 11 available now. And this is a super dramatic slide. I showed my wife all my slides. The only comment she had was, "That's too dramatic," and I left it because I don't care. It is now retired. This exam was pretty easy. It doesn't really matter. We're not going to talk about it because you can't take it now. But it was always kind of the odd duck in the family. So security specialty was the first course or the first exam I took after the associate level. So I took a break. I had taken those 3 in July last year, and then came back in January and started with the security specialty. And it was super fascinating. A couple things to note. The cost of the specialties goes up to $300. So those half-off vouchers are going to come in really handy at this point because you don't want to pay $300 per course. Same number of questions, but the time, you're going to have a lot more time for these specialty courses, and especially for the professional. So 170 minutes, you're almost 3 hours there to take these specialty exams. The reason for that, it's the same number of questions, but the questions are going to be a lot longer, a lot more nuanced. You're going to be doing a whole lot of picking 3 out of 5, and really all 5 of them are valid. It's just which 3 of those 5 are the most valid. So not a lot of fun. They can be pretty grueling, particularly if you don't have a lot of background in the subject matter. So security was a little more straightforward from my perspective, having a lot of exposure to AWS. So if you've built on AWS for several years, you can't avoid sort of security. It's, as AWS says, it's a job zero. So it sort of infiltrates everything on AWS. So if you kind of have a basic understanding of how to write IAM policies and to sort of, least privilege, define your infrastructure to be secure, that's going to go a long ways. And the practical knowledge from doing that on a daily basis goes a long way. So I didn't have to prepare too hard for this one. The A Cloud Guru course was, again, fantastic. And I'm not going to say that about every one of these exams. There are, later in the process here, I'll share some of my stories with A Cloud Guru and where I would recommend going other places. In terms of subject matter on this test, so you're going to have CloudTrail, heavily involved, sort of monitoring, API usage on your AWS account and understanding how you can kind of audit your CloudTrail logs and make sure they haven't been tampered with, those sort of concepts. VPC, again, there's a lot of security concepts within networking on AWS. So understanding NACLs and security groups and how you sort of can control at a network level security. Then there's a whole lot of like kind of obscure services, not obscure if it's your job is security, but Inspector and KMS and Secrets. Secrets Manager, I think more people probably have exposure to, and same with KMS, but things like Guard Duty and Inspector and Macy, these come up in the security specialty because they are related to security. It'll be like 1 or 2 questions on each of those sort of smaller services. But you do need to make sure you kind of have an understanding at a high level. Macy is for protecting PII or whatever. Study materials, again, I did nothing but the A Cloud Guru course. All of these courses, the A Cloud Guru video courses, I just watched at 2 times speed. Again, I have a lot of experience on AWS. Your mileage may vary, but I think you can cover a lot of ground that way. So I watched these courses over a pretty short amount of time, took some practice tests and felt pretty confident. Database specialties. So this was the first exam I took where I was not super thrilled with how prepared I was. And a lot of that was because the A Cloud Guru course for database was not great. It maybe for some people it would be great. For me, it lacked all of the recaps, all of the sort of checkpoints. So if you watch the early, like the associate level A Cloud Guru courses, Ryan Kroonenberg is the founder of A Cloud Guru. He does most of those courses. And he has a very methodical sort of process where he is going through the subject matter in a very like mechanical way. And at the end of every thing he says, he sort of has bullet points that are exam tips, recaps. You can kind of feel like you're nailing that content into your brain throughout the course. This database exam on A Cloud Guru, the course didn't have any of that. And it didn't have any kind of a practice test, if I recall. So I kind of like went through it, different instructor, and thought I kind of was okay. I'd done a lot of work with databases on AWS. So this was the hardest test for me probably because I was super underprepared. And I think that's a key point, is that really the difficulty of all these exams is going to be relative based on how much you've prepared. So I took some of the hardest courses or some of the hardest exams that AWS offers and felt pretty comfortable through the whole exam because I was really well prepared. This one I was not prepared for. So I would recommend, when you see this Data Cumulus logo, that's Stefan Merrick. He's on Udemy and he has a company called Data Cumulus. He's fantastic instructor. All of his content's really good. I used it for all the professional level exams and a couple of the hard specialties. So I know he has a database course. I haven't actually personally taken it, but I would recommend going elsewhere. If you start with the associate level on A Cloud Guru, maybe look at some other options when you get to this point. Another point I want to make on the order of these exams, with the exception of Cloud Practitioner, this is the order I took them in, and I would recommend it. And there's like some science to it. I tried to order things such that, so the associate levels, I think you could mix up the order and it's not that important. Security kind of is an underlying thing on AWS. And I took that specialty first, knowing that just the understanding of when it came to, dealing with data analytics, we're going to talk about S3 a lot. And if I understand the security aspects of S3, I don't have to learn that again. So I started with security. I moved into database, and then we'll kind of go through the rest of the order, but I want to just call that out, that I actually do recommend taking them in this order, especially when you get into like data analytics to machine learning. There's just a lot of overlap that you can save yourself some time. So the database specialty, it's all the database services. So I put them in order here in terms of how important they are on the exam. So for instance, Neptune, there's maybe a couple questions on Neptune, their graph database offering. RDS, DynamoDB, Aurora are all over the place. I didn't realize how little I know about RDS, especially when it comes to sort of disaster recovery, and the differences between RDS and Aurora can become important on the exam. So understanding, where the advantages of Aurora can help you out and save you a lot of pain, things you have to build manually with RDS. DynamoDB, you have to have a really good understanding, sort of concurrency limits and how to sort of manage a DynamoDB instance, things like DAX for speeding up, putting a cache, a write through cache in front of DynamoDB. There's a lot of depth on each of these database services. DMS, so data migration services, there's a lot of questions on how you would take a legacy customer who has some on-premise database and they want to migrate it into an Oracle RDS instance or something. DMS comes up a lot, how you're going to fail over or how you're going to cut over and how you're going to manage, if you're sending off terabytes of data on a snowball, how are you going to manage when they go live and making sure you're taking advantage of DMS for the live cutover and keeping data in sync. All that sort of stuff comes up a lot on the database exam. And then Elasticache and DocumentDB less so. DocumentDB, kind of like Neptune, just briefly touched on. This one, all of my difficulties are, I'm trying to be sort of neutral. For me, this was a lot harder, but I think if you were to ask, sort of take a poll, it's not that difficult in an exam. So I'm trying to make these a little more neutral. Next is the data analytics specialty. And this one was a lot of fun for me. I enjoyed the A-Cloud Guru course, and I use a lot of these services. So sort of building out serverless data analytics, things like Glue and Kinesis were really familiar to me, and Athena, S3. But I enjoyed also learning some services that I don't touch much because I don't have the money to, I guess, Redshift, EMR, and QuickSight to a lesser extent. Yeah, this was an interesting course. It's a lot of moving data around, reshaping data. And I don't have a whole lot to say other than I only use the A-Cloud Guru course and I passed this one pretty easy. It's a great segue into, and I do need to probably start speeding up, great segue into the machine learning specialty. So I think that's one of the areas that you can gain a lot, is sort of going from data analytics straight into machine learning, because there's a lot of overlap with especially Kinesis. So when it comes to machine learning, the machine learning course is sort of like 40% algorithms and things that are specific to machine learning, and then like 60% data wrangling and moving data around to prepare it for machine learning. So here on the primary services, SageMaker, that's a whole family of services. There's like a dozen. So things like Comprehend and Textract. There's a lot of SageMaker family services. And each of those little smaller subservices might only have a question or two. But as long as you know kind of which services offer what, you know that Comprehend is about whatever text classification. It's kind of at that level. And then there are sort of a lot of esoteric machine learning questions about how you like tune hyperparameters based on a specific problem. So you're trying to create a model that accomplishes this thing. Which knobs do you want to focus on to kind of accomplish that? Yeah, we'll just keep moving here. So this one was fairly difficult. For me, not having a ton of machine learning experience in production, I've built some things in that space, but it's not my specialty. So it's a pretty difficult course. Okay, so advanced networking has a reputation as being maybe the most difficult exam. It was at this point, I guess I had 6 out of 12 of the, is that right? Maybe 6 or 7. I almost decided to just bail because this course is super hard. And it's super hard mostly because unless you're a network admin, like unless your specialty is networks and you have that background, it's a whole lot of concepts you've got to learn really fast just to kind of get an understanding of where these services fit in. On top of that, Direct Connect, which is maybe if there's one service that defines the advanced networking exam, it would be Direct Connect. Direct Connect is not a thing that most people are going to have exposure to. Unless you work at a big organization that is actually physically connecting to AWS through Direct Connect, you're not going to have hands-on experience with that. And to get hands-on experience with it is very difficult and expensive. So a lot of the difficulty in this course, or this exam, comes from the fact that you're memorizing sort of routing stuff, BGP protocol stuff, and doing things with services you don't have any hands-on experience with. It makes this one a pretty grueling exam to study for, and you read a lot of horror stories. I made the mistake of Googling sort of like advanced networking, how did it go? And reading some pretty bad stories about people taking this exam multiple times and even having some kind of networking background. It can be a really challenging course. So for this one, I didn't use a Cloud Guru. I'd kind of been burnt with the database exam, and I just felt like I wanted to find other materials. This is the first course or the first exam that I used Tutorials Dojo. Their practice tests were awesome. The official study guide, also a great resource for this one. So I bought the hardcover book just because I have some nostalgia, I guess, around having those really thick technical books. I read through that, and then as well, there's a free exam exam readiness course. AWS has those for each of the exams, but the advanced networking one is super good, and it's way more in depth in my experience. So I did review the advanced networking. I already forgot what I just said. Exam readiness course. You'll find it just kind of on the same course details page with everything else. So this one goes into extreme depth on some stuff that you may or may not have any exposure to. Really difficult course, difficult exam. I'm gonna say course for exam and vice versa the entire time. So then after advanced networking, I'm glad I did push through. I think I spent a week and a half preparing for that one, and then went into DevOps Engineer Professional. Of the two professional courses, so there's DevOps Engineer and there's Solutions Architect Professional. DevOps Engineer is generally considered easier. So I started here. I'm also a developer, so it's more of the developer track. I just used Stefan Merrick's course, Data Cumulus. That was my only prep, and then obviously experience building with these services. It goes into a lot more depth. So it's a lot of the same kind of themes that came up in Developer Associate, just it's a 3-hour course. Each question is like a huge paragraph, and then the answers are all paragraphs, and it just wears you down. And you'll hear that on Solutions Architect as well. You're gonna hit all these services in pretty good depth, but the sort of software development lifecycle services, so the code pipeline family, they're gonna come up again pretty heavily on this DevOps Engineer Professional course or exam. Oh my word, I don't know why I can't do that. And then, yeah, a lot of the same services we talked about with the associate level. So this just gets more intense, more details, more understanding at a lower level. There's also 75 questions for the professional exams. So those two are a little bit longer. And then the last one, Solutions Architect Professional. This is, I think, if it's not advanced networking, this is sort of known as the most difficult of the AWS exams. You kind of have to know like quite a bit about all the services. That's an exaggeration. I mean, even the serverless stuff isn't that well represented, but the stuff you've been learning throughout the specialties, and to a lesser extent what you learned at a sort of shallow depth on the associate level, it's going into pretty extreme detail. So you're having to learn a lot about a lot. It's a difficult exam. Again, I used Data Cumulus and I used Tutorials Dojo's practice tests. And the thing I will say, this is a really hard exam. It's less hard if you just spent like the last few weeks doing all the specialties, because I don't know if they really designed it in such a way that that it's supposed to be easier. But when you've just learned in depth advanced networking, and you've learned data analytics and machine learning on AWS, you get to Solutions Architect and it's almost a recap. You have to know that same level of depth that you knew for all the specialties. You just have to know it for all of them. So it felt like preparing for this one was really just kind of recapping all the things I just covered through the specialty exams. I would recommend another order thing. Do advanced networking before Solutions Architect Professional, because you're going to have on the Solutions Architect Professional, you're going to have a lot of pretty advanced networking questions. And if you already know all that stuff from taking advanced networking, it makes it that much easier. You don't really have to think about that in your exam prep for this very difficult course. So some general exam tips, and then we'll get into Q&A. Schedule it. So for each of the exams, I booked a date that I felt like was slightly too aggressive, sometimes way too aggressive. So I took the Solutions Architect Professional 2 days after the DevOps Professional. And I did that because I knew it would force me to sort of focus and get the thing done. I've built on AWS for a long time. I just wanted to sort of validate that knowledge and fill in gaps and things like that. And I wanted to do it pretty aggressively. So scheduling a date and sticking to it is the best way to do that. Also be prepared to sit for those, the specialty and then the professional exams. They're almost 3 hours. I took every bit of the 3 hours for a couple of those. And if you drink like a bunch of coffee or a bunch of water before the exam, it sucks to have to pee. I mean, honestly, it really does. Also make sure you sleep like before the exam. This is stupid stuff that I feel like is super generic, but being well rested for some of those more difficult exams, you're doing a lot of thinking and a lot of reading. It's an insane amount of reading on those professional exams. Lastly, don't count on Wi-Fi. So I moved to a wired connection about halfway through because I had some issues where the proctor couldn't see my video, and I can only assume it was sort of bandwidth reasons. Yeah, okay, so that was a lot. I spent more time kind of going through each of those than maybe I expected to. Let's do some Q&A before we run out of time. Yeah, so the question in the room was, what was my motivation for doing this? I would say in retrospect, I'm glad I did it because of things like AWS IQ. So there's a great way to sort of monetize your certifications if you're based in the US through that platform. It's sort of a marketplace. But at the time I didn't know about that. So I really did it more as sort of a professional challenge. Just my employer at the time was covering exams. They're part of the APN, so the partner network. If your employer is part of that partner network, they get reimbursed for the certs. So AWS basically pays for all of your exam costs. Yeah, and I just love AWS. So I just thought it was a great way to kind of dive in and force myself to learn some stuff I wouldn't otherwise maybe explore. What's that? Yeah, so he asked, has it been useful? Yeah, so AWS IQ, I think like in the month of March, and I've tweeted this publicly, so I don't mind to say it, I made $60,000 in the month of March just freelancing, and it was exclusively AWS stuff. And I don't think I touched that if I hadn't sort of had these certifications and gone. AWS IQ makes these things like little trophies on your profile, and everybody sees them when you bid on work. And it just opened up all kinds of, like if I see something on AWS IQ that it's a customer I want to work with, it's 9 times out of 10 if I respond, they're getting back to me. And I think the certs go a long way toward that. So it sounds like kind of like gaming the system, and it does feel a bit like a cheat code, but if you're based in the US, just get them, get the certs. If you like AWS, get them and get on AWS IQ, and like, just don't send your employer my way because you're gonna leave your job. It's really great.
Hey,
I did actually. I did actually. Well, I didn't leave it for that reason. I had kind of felt like for a while I wanted to go out and sort of freelance again. I started my career as a freelancer. But yeah, once I knew that AWS IQ was a thing, it was a lot easier to sort of leave and know I had some security there. I didn't feel like I was going to be looking too hard for work. We've got some remote attendees as well. I don't know, Jason, if there's been any questions. I'm just pulling up the chat so I can see.
Sure. I think Elvis might have had a question. I muted him for a second. Elvis, if you have a question, you're welcome to speak up or ask it in the chat.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Adam, I just wanted to ask about AWS IQ. Do you need a certain amount of certifications to qualify or to be eligible to be on AWS IQ, or you just you can get on board with a single certification?
Yeah, so with a single certification, you can apply to be an expert. I don't know what that application process, like I don't know if they turn people down for any reason, but you have to have anything over cloud practitioner. So cloud practitioner doesn't count, but if you have any of the associate level or higher certifications, you can apply to be an expert. I don't know what the experience is like on AWS IQ if you only have one or a few. I know having all 12 of them or 11 that show up on my AWS IQ profile gets me work at a clip I can't even do. So I have to sort of turn down more than I take on. But if you had a few of them, maybe it's more competitive. Maybe you're having to sort of sell a little better, or maybe you're just not getting the responses. And that's why I kind of push, why I sort of beat the drum that getting all of them is sort of beneficial.
We had a question from Jose. He was asking, how do you feel all of these certifications have affected your work area, or how much value have they added to your professional career? I think that's what he's trying to ask.
Yeah, so I would say some of the exams gave me exposure to services on AWS I wouldn't otherwise have exposure to. And in the freelance market, sort of being able to take on work that maybe I wouldn't have been comfortable with, whether that's tuning models in SageMaker. There's stuff that I really didn't have a lot of professional experience with, and preparing for and passing the exams kind of gave me enough confidence to take on work, helping customers with problems on those services. So it's been beneficial in that way. It's not just sort of been a checkbox that gets me on the phone with customers. It's also given me some knowledge that I otherwise wouldn't have had. Ben. Yeah, so I've had this question from a few people. Like, it seems like it's, even just in the 5 or 6 weeks I've been on there, there's sort of waves of, early on when I first got on the platform, it felt like every other request for an expert was around media services. There's a huge representation of the media services family. People wanting to use like the Chime SDK to do live video streaming stuff. There's a lot of that. Now, all throughout, there's been a steady amount of like, I want to move my WordPress site into AWS because Heroku costs are killing me or something, and they want to use something like Lightsail. I've seen a lot of that stuff, and just verbatim, like, move my WordPress site to Lightsail. So there's like kind of odd stuff that is a theme that you see a lot, and I don't know if that's through some kind of SEO or marketing channels that Amazon's pushing people. But then there's just a lot of great like long-term customers that it's a mid-sized startup, and they just want an expert that can come in and help. That they have sort of engineering chops, and they have like Rails developers, but they don't have anyone that has AWS expertise. And so they sort of want somebody to come in and be their sort of AWS guide, and sort of make sure they're doing CI/CD and all this sort of stuff, infrastructure as code, doing all that stuff sort of optimally on AWS. And I'm sorry, Jason, I forgot to repeat Ben's question. You guys didn't hear his question. And now, as I said that, I totally forgot Ben's question. Ben, what was your question? Oh yeah, the most demand on AWS IQ. So what sort of services are people requesting help with the most? That was the question.
Adam, I have a follow-up question to that. When you're working with customers on AWS IQ and basically monetizing your certification knowledge, is AWS setting the rate or project fee, or are you negotiating with that with the customers on a per project basis? How does that part work when you mention $60,000 across all of your different projects? I'm just curious how that amount came about.
Yeah, so AWS doesn't get involved at all in the pricing. Basically, people put out a vague description of what they need, sometimes more descriptive than others. And then you just start a dialogue. So you can sort of send a message to them. It's all sort of like instant messaging at that point, but they have built-in facilities for submitting proposals, which can have dollar amounts. So you basically tell them, I will do this scope of work for this many dollars, and then they can accept that. And then you basically can, from there, once they've accepted a proposal, you can request permissions, and you basically get granted like an IAM role into their account, like a cross account role, where you can then access directly from AWS IQ. You can hop into their account and do whatever work. And then you can request payment, and they basically pay against that proposal.
And then when you get paid, does that show up as a credit on your Amazon bill, or do you actually get to cash out?
No, it is actually dollars. that would be a pretty big bummer, and you could just discount everything I just said if it was just AWS credits.
Right. Just
No,
making sure. Just making.
yeah, no, it's like they set up an AWS marketplace account for you, and you get it's distributed once a month, so you get paid once a month through, and it's like I think it's the same. Maybe if like you have some kind of like an AMI you sell or something, you have something on the AWS marketplace that you sell. It's the same fund distribution system as that.
Thank you. And if anyone else has questions, please post them in the chat. We're going to wrap up here in just a few minutes. I don't see any other questions in the chat right now. So if you've posted something that wasn't covered, please post it again. I do have one more question for Adam. That's a pretty generic question, but hopefully this will be insightful for folks that are planning on it, accumulating some certifications. My understanding has been that you would go to an exam center and to take the certification exams, but based on what you were saying about making sure you're plugged in and have Wi-Fi, I was almost under the impression that you're taking the exams on your own equipment at your own location. Can you tell us a little bit more about your exam environment if you were not going to a proctored exam location?
Yep, so I took them all from home, from my office. That was something that was another big like pro for me. Like there were, my employer was covering the costs and I could take them from my home office. That was a big deal for me. So I think just through COVID in the last year, they opened that up. It was maybe like optional before, but they made it like for all exams, you can take them from home. Yeah, so I didn't have to go into any sort of proctor location or whatever.
That's great. Thank you.
And there was one more in-person question. Oh, two more, yeah.
So one more about AWS IQ. So you're a freelancer on AWS IQ. How is there a representation for companies that might have one or more people that are certified, or do they need representatives?
Yep. So the question was, like, I'm an individual on AWS IQ. Does it also have representation from organizations that might have multiple, certified individuals? And yes, there are organizations represented. They're the only other people I ever see on there that have more than 5 or 6 certifications. So I'm telling you guys, there is this opportunity in time where you can go out and get all 11 of them or whatever, and you just get. I've had customers tell me directly that they chose me because, like, it's just a bigger number, and it was that simple because they just show them all over the service. Yeah, you had another question? Yeah. Yeah. So Ben asked, how, sorry, I keep saying Ben because he's the only person here I know. He asked, how was I managing my time? So was I sort of taking off work to prepare for these tests if I was doing it in such a short time frame? I wake up really early. I've got a young family, so I've got 2 young boys. We go to bed at like 7 or 8. And so I go to bed at the same time as them, and I get up at sometimes 2, 3, something like that in the morning. So I've always had sort of my side project time, which is early AM. And I did most of my studying in that window. There were some where I studied at night just before an exam in the morning, but I also took my tests really early in the morning. Like I took them at 3 and 4 most mornings, just because it was the only time my house is quiet. Like my boys are just destroying things all day. So yeah, no, I took them really early in the morning. Most tests on average, I prepared a couple days. So the key for me was just watching these video courses at 2 times speed. That's like the best. If you can just blaze through it. Yeah. Yeah, so I would say the only caveat is—
What was the question?
Yeah, the question was, is that really it? You just watched the videos, took the test, and that was it? Yes, but I've built on AWS for 7 years. So I started my own company and really had 5 years as like in like a little digital media lab where I was the CTO doing whatever I wanted on AWS. So I've had a lot of time on AWS to kind of build things out and understand a lot of these services. That said, for some of these services, SageMaker, I don't have a lot of exposure to SageMaker, EMR, Redshift. Like I was learning exclusively through those videos for some of those services, and it was sufficient. So yeah.
Okay, can you take one last question, Adam?
I can. I'm good as long as everyone else is good.
All right. We've got one last question from Jose. If anyone else has questions after we wrap up the recording, we can stick around and you can unmute and ask Adam a couple questions before he has to go. But Jose was asking, just in general, how would you decide between going with a brand specific certification for AWS versus Azure or Google Cloud Platform versus a brandless certification like the CCSK? Do you have any insight there?
So early in my career, I took some sort of vendor agnostic certifications, and I had kind of, maybe, I don't know if you're alluding to this, but I had feelings that that was better maybe early on. I would say I'm just really into AWS now, so it's never really crossed my mind whether I would take like any other family of cert. I really wasn't looking to get into certifications again. I had kind of a thing early in my career where I was kind of obsessive about them. In this late in my career, I really hadn't considered it until I learned of the AWS certs, and I'm just really into AWS. So I don't know if there's a right answer. I will say if you're in the US, again, there is a right answer. If you want to get on AWS IQ, that's get all the AWS certs.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all of your insight today, Adam. It's amazing to hear how you accomplished the feat of passing all 12 certs in only 6 weeks. Even if the 6 weeks weren't consecutive, it's still pretty amazing. Yeah. And I mean, I know personally, I've studied for exams, and for the sole reason of learning the topic matter. I haven't taken any of the exams, so I feel a lot better about it knowing that you and I have probably studied a lot of the same materials. So I can attest that A Cloud Guru, at least the videos that I've seen have been great resource. I don't think Adam or I are getting kickbacks from them. We're just mentioning them because they're that great. I mean, they had reached out to me at one point to ask if I would record a session, which was quite an honor. I didn't take them up on that, but I do track their content and do really appreciate, especially a lot of the content that Ryan did, the primary sort of founder of A Cloud Guru. With that being said, if you want folks to follow you, I'm assuming the best places to follow you would be on Twitter or maybe GitHub. Do you have any other suggestions besides Twitter, those handles?
I'm trying to kind of be more active on Twitter, so I would say that's the place to find me in terms of talking. If you want to do stuff like build stuff, GitHub would be the place. But yeah, I do most of my talking on Twitter.
Great. Well, with that, if anyone has follow-up questions, feel free to post in the meetup, and we'll try to field questions there. Or if you are watching this on YouTube, post questions there, and I'll do my best to answer them, or I'll forward them to Adam and see if he has any input for you. But thanks again to everyone for tuning in this month. If you are interested in more AWS content, we'd love to have you join us in June for a talk on AWS CLI and the AWS SDK. Specifically, we'll talk about how to get started with those if you've mostly managed your AWS resources through the web GUI or the web UI or the AWS console. This would give you a great insight into how to get started with managing your resources through the command line or through the dev tools. Hope to see you there. That meetup's already been posted on the SGF AWS meetup page, so please RSVP, and we'll send updates as they come. Thanks again to everyone who joined us tonight.